So, Coté, I think I've mentioned on the show before, maybe a few times, my degree is in fine art, specifically in photography, which was over 20 years ago I earned this degree. And I was thinking, I don't know what your degree's in. What's your degree?
Oh, boy. This is exciting. My degree, I went to the University of Texas in Austin. And my degree is in philosophy, and then I have just needed to take one more class minor in English, which.
So you don't have a minor in English, is what?
No, I do.
No, I'm kidding you.
Yeah. It would.
I see. Low hanging fruits.
I have a mid-size degree in English, but I had to take one more class, and I was just like, I can't stand this anymore, and I don't know. This is one of those things. As an adult, you're like. Past self was an idiot. They should have just taken the seminar where a bunch of people talked about some book they read, and they would have had this credential. But at the time, it was cool. So the question is, so what you do now, do you have any idea what you might do as a career as a philosophy major? Or were you just like, this sounds fun? Yeah. I did it because I liked the material. Because I had... I'd started programming in 94, 95 when I was in high school, because I think I've told this story briefly, but one of the fathers of a fellow student, a classmate, that's what you call him, had a startup to do like, this is the 90s, so they had an online mall, and they realized that high schoolers are very cheap. So you can hire them. So yeah. I had a programming job all throughout there. So my degree was never really career minded. It was just
you kind of knew you were going to have a tech career, and then you.
I don't. That's giving me a little too much credit. I didn't even think about that. It was just like, I like studying this. I have a job, so it never really entered my mind to get a degree that made me employable.
Oh, to be young again.
I know. It's like an extremely lucky series of events that I just sort of like stumbled into. So a
follow-up question, even though you didn't intend it, do you think that your degree in philosophy has aided your tech career in any way?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of, this is a typical Gen Xer liberal arts position, right? It's just like, well, now I can read and study anything and then write about it, right? Like, and so that's a cliche way of putting it. But yeah, I think for the work that I do, and even when I was only a programmer, like it makes it, it makes it possible that you can actually like comprehend and communicate things. And so I think, I think both in like the, of course, this is the type of English, I don't know if this is peculiar to American stuff, but you read books and you talk about their deep essence and stuff. It wasn't creative writing or anything. And that with like philosophy, it's for the role after I was a programmer, being an analyst, and now whatever it is I do, like it's pretty good for like analysis. And then, the other thing that I think is important, and then I'll stop, is like, I guess you would call it needing to come up with a position, whether you care or not. Like, one might call it a take, but it's sort of like when you study those fields, you can't really, I tried several times, but you can't really write the paper. There's no paper to write here. Like this.
I take issue with the fact that there always has to be a take about everything in our modern society, but I don't want to open that can of worms because I'm excited to introduce our guest already.
Maybe in society, yes, but just in the milieu of work. Yes, we don't need to open the can of worms.
Right. Sandwich versus taco, who cares? I don't care.
Exactly.
Hello, Josh Berkus. Welcome to
there.
the show. Will you introduce yourself, please, and tell us your college degree?
Yeah, so I'm Josh Berkus. I contribute to a variety of open source projects, Kubernetes being currently the most prominent. Have had a history working on various open source projects for the last, I used to say 25 years, but now it's more like 29, isn't it?
Time keeps doing that.
Yeah. I work for Red Hat, and I'm talking to you here from Portland, Oregon.
Awesome.
So, I also have a liberal arts degree.
Yeah.
My major was fine art. Like you,
Me
in
too.
my case, in sculpture.
Sculpture, cool.
So, I still do pottery.
Oh my God. He's holding up a handmade Kubernetes mug, ceramic mug. It's beautiful.
Yeah. I made these for the Kubernetes 111 release team because I was release lead for 111. So
wow.
And
so how many of them did you make?
40, I think.
Wow.
It was customary for the release team, the release lead, to give a gift to everybody who was on the release team. At the time that I did it, it was something you provided yourself. The release team has gotten a little bit too large, and now the CNCF actually pays for it. So, and so I got the liberal degree in fine art. Like Cote, I was I almost had a second major in economics.
Okay.
But as far as economics was concerned, it was still the Reagan years. And so I was really not interested in conservative monetarist economics. If I had been 4 years younger, I actually would have gotten the degree in economics because economics changed a lot in that amount of time.
Oh yeah.
But at the time, I was not interested in monetary theory, which seemed very boring to me and kind of beside the point. I'm
really interested in how or whether your college degree, whether a sculpture degree, has informed your career in tech.
Yeah. Well, leaving aside, the stuff that I've designed for actual projects, although not as much because I did not study design. And so if I can locate somebody who's an actual designer, I have them do stuff.
Absolutely.
I mean, this, but a lot of people who don't have any experience in the arts don't realize that design is actually separate from other divisions of art and has its own, sort of set of skills and focuses. And if you're an artist, you can punt as a designer, but you're aware that you're not really a real designer. So where the liberal arts degree was useful is that a big part of a liberal arts curriculum is learning how to learn stuff.
Yeah.
And as I say to people, my entire field, actually in both incarnations of my technical career, right? So first starting with databases and then going from there to cloud, right? Did not exist when I graduated college.
Oh.
Like I didn't study CS in college at all because at the time I was going to school, CS was part of the math department. And I'd already dropped out of physics because I realized I didn't like higher math. So I wasn't interested in hanging around the math department. A lot of my friends were in CS, but I wasn't for that reason. So I had this fun thing of I had an art degree that I paid for partly by running the University Computer Lab.
Oh, so cluster. You had early, just like Coté, you were doing tech stuff.
I started when I was 13. This was when the 8-bit PCs came out, and Atari, the gaming company, had their own PC for a while. And so if you were interested in video games, which with what teenager wasn't, this was the era of video game arcades, right? It was an opportunity to design your own video games. And if you just learned some programming, which I did starting at 13 years old. So, and by the time I graduated, I was actually writing programs for my dad, who was a physician. I mean, here's the funny thing is my dad also started out in computers. He did the opposite way. He started out in computers in college, but this was during the vacuum tube era. And decided that he wanted a job. He wanted to deal with people more. And, this was because he's a boomer. He could go back to school for free. And so he got a medical degree, and he's ended up in OB-GYN. So,
fascinating. My experience getting
the biomechanic.
Yeah.
So you were an Atari person then. I don't meet many people who had Ataris. That's Ataris as PCs.
It wasn't very successful. It wasn't very successful, but it was actually in my opinion, the Atari was the best of the 8-bit computers for learning, because it was very easy to take apart. Compared to, say, Apple's, the computers were relatively affordable, and so you weren't afraid to take them apart.
Yeah.
And there was the Atari developed a whole hacker culture around it. Like, when by the time the Atari 400 expired and we all had 800s or STs, we took one of those old, there was an Atari club in my town, and I joined the Atari club. This is in San Antonio, Texas, actually. And I joined the Atari club, and we took an old 400, took a lot of it apart, added new wiring, fused it with a CB radio, and made a primitive voice synthesizer.
Very cool.
So
that's awesome.
Yeah. And if you look at that kind of led directly into a portion of my career much later in database, because the thing I got paid the most money for in databases was performance optimization, right? But I feel like if you started out in those days where you were literally modifying your computer with a soldering iron, you had a lot better understanding of the parts of a PC and how they might affect performance than people who started out in the cloud, right?
Yeah. You get where is this literally being run? What compute is lighting up with this? Where is the memory? Where is the network? The actual literal wires connecting this to this. Yes.
Right. And
that's cool.
Yeah. And to think about that in terms of hey, maybe this is not a software bug, right? One of for a whole bunch of our clients, this is now leaping ahead 15 years later, right? But we have the Postgres company, right? And a whole series of our clients have crippling performance problems that are taking their websites down. And and we're going through this, and this is before everybody migrated to Amazon. So we could still check on what kind of hardware they had. So this is when, everybody was on Rackspace, actually.
Okay.
And what had happened was Rackspace had bought a new generation of Dell equipment. And Dell had this whole generation of release of their affordable servers that had a bad North Bridge. Now, for people who are not hardware people, the North Bridge is the chip that shuttles data, it shuttles bits between the CPU and the memory banks. So if that is not operating well, the entire computer slows down to a crawl. And what would happen is once you went over a certain amount of traffic of the North Bridge, it essentially shut down. And I do kind of feel like if I, and actually a couple of my, colleagues, a couple of my partners in the business hadn't come from that era where having a computer meant monkeying with the hardware yourself, it would have taken us a lot longer to identify that we were dealing with an actual hardware problem.
Do you think that era of caring is the wrong word, but getting a lot of benefit of knowing about the hardware and the software working together, does that still exist? And on one side, you listen to the Oxide people talk, and you're like, oh, it's alive and well. They're going crazy with the hardware and the software, but then they're the only ones. Unless maybe I don't seem to encounter a lot of conversation where I'm a software person, so this sounds odd, but where the hardware matters, where something's going on with it. It seems unseen nowadays.
Well, but so I would say the problem with that is it still matters, right? And particularly we're seeing that now, right? Now that we're getting into the generation where people are building their own AI models and AI agents and that sort of thing. suddenly the hardware matters again, right? You need to have the right GPU. You need to have a bunch of these other things. It matters how many CPU threads you have, everything else, right? Suddenly the hardware matters again. And we've had a couple generations of programmers that have gone their entire software careers not thinking about hardware at all.
Right.
And so it's really hard, they're suddenly having to catch up here. Whereas, like, for example, weirdly, we have the ARM people coming in and pushing a lot of multi-architecture and everything else, right? And you look at that and you're like, it's mostly a bunch of older folks driving a lot of that. And part of the reason is because older folks already had the multi-arch experience, right? We had that multi-arch experience back in the early aughts, right? And so going back to multi-arch is not this mysterious, unknown universe to us, but something we were familiar with. We're like, hey, is x86 starting to suck? Well, maybe we should actually go to, something else. We try something else, right? Those the new ARM chips are looking kind of cool. Let's try them out. Whereas if your entire career has been on top of x86, you never thought about what processor you were using before, then moving to having multiple CPU architectures is very frightening. You don't know what's involved, right? You don't know what you don't know, right?
Yeah, exactly. You might not even know. I mean, I am like younger in tech, a medium in tech, and I wouldn't know to even think about the hardware level if I was having that problem. So exactly, you don't know what you don't know. How do you begin to find that that's the problem as someone who's not introduced to the concepts? That's rhetorical, but it's also real. Like, is it just?
Yeah.
I have an unrelated question that I want to circle back to, and that is, so you made 40 cups for the Kubernetes. And like, so, you're trained in this, you've got a certificate of knowledge and training, and I know you got a store and everything. Obviously you're good at doing it. Like, what do you do differently when you make like 40 cups versus 1 cup? Like, how does that get planned out and handled differently? Or is it exactly the same? You just make 1 cup 40 times.
Yeah, well, particularly, I mean, there is the 1 cup, right? So the body of the cup, right, is going to be the same for each. And by the way, because this was a 11D1 release, this cup is particularly patterned after a cup used in the Tolkien movies, the Fellowship
Lord
of the Ring,
Cups.
etc. Right. Yeah. Right. They have a scene that takes place in a pub in the Shire. And they have mugs that look like this. So the body is the same. I mean, the thing was, the ceramicist I studied with, like Paul Soldner was the head of the ceramics department, right? So Paul Soldner came from a tradition of production pottery and the Japanese method of learning crafting. And both of those involve volume and repetition, right? Like one of our assignments, one of the terms, like the second term you were in Paul's studio, for example, your assignment was make 100 of something. Wow. He doesn't care what, but you have to make 100 of them, right? And up until then, I'd been making, like maybe 6-9 vessels per term, right? So it was a very different experience. But the moment that you actually do that, you start thinking about, first of all, how can I make this more consistent? How can I make this faster? Right. The 100, you could be trying to make 100 identical ones, in which case, you're actually sort of perfecting a shape. Or you can do what I do because I was focused on sculpture, which is you made 100 variations around a theme. So playing with the same idea and doing it 100 different ways. But either way, it changed how you think about doing something, right? Because one of the biggest mistakes, going back to ceramics, is one of the biggest mistakes I see people who are new to ceramics, particularly pottery and the wheel, make is they're throwing a vessel on the wheel, it goes badly, and they try to fix it. It's like, no, don't fix it. Cut it off the wheel, start over.
Yeah.
Because you'll spend an hour trying to fix it, and it'll still look terrible. Right?
Right.
So that's part of it. But then I really cut out my work for me because I had each person's name embossed on the cup.
Goodness. I didn't even notice that part.
So I was actually making 40 different ones.
So there's a Kubernetes logo embossed for those who can't see it. Besides it being like beautifully glazed with a different color on the inside and the outside. Yeah. There's Kubernetes logo embossed, as well as a name embossed, as well as the 1.11 embossed too. Yeah.
By the way, the 112 release lead really hated me because she's like, "What am I gonna do now?" So that meant I actually had to make 80 of them. Because you have in any large, if you have a kiln full of ware, right, you're making 40 cups, right? A few of them, like even at my level of experience, you can guarantee a few of them won't come out, right? The glaze will bubble, the handle will crack, something else will happen. And because of the timeline, I didn't want to do some over from scratch, right? Because those people would be getting their stuff 5 months later. At this point, I was actually in my own studio, but it was one I could only access part-time. So from throwing to firing, it was like 4 to 6 months. Today, I'm part of a co-op. And so if I actually have the time to spend in the studio, which unfortunately my work travel schedule really interferes with, I can go from throwing something to having a finished thing in about 3-4 weeks.
And that's like one item, or can you just do a batch of them? Like you could do that.
Well, no, you do a batch, right? You do a batch, right?
But you could could you do 10 vessels in that time period, or does it cap out at like 20, or like what is the kind of like maximum?
Well, it depends. It depends on how much free time I have, and importantly, how used to producing that thing I am. Because when I produce a new shape, there's a lot of time that I spend figuring out how to throw that shape consistently. Right. So for example, I had a thing a couple of years ago where I did one of the sort of pottery milestones for the first time, even though I've been doing pottery for a really long time, I just never done this before, which is to produce a full set of dinnerware for somebody.
Okay.
So 10 4-piece place settings.
Wow. So
that's 40 individual pieces, right? Plates in 2 sizes, bowls in 2 different shapes. And in that case, I was specifically copying something that they used to have. So that required the production of some new tools, for one thing, that I had to spend some time tinkering with. And then when I did that, I actually had to experiment a lot with how exactly are the shapes thrown. What's a good way to do it, right? Because like one of the things that was the most painful is these wide pasta bowls. And the problem with the wide pasta bowls, they have really wide rims. And the problem with those wide rims is when the clay is wet, they tend to fall over.
So is this person who you're making, like, this seems like a tremendous amount of work. Is someone commissioning you, or is it someone who's really dear to you? Yeah.
No. They just paid me for it.
Okay.
So they paid me for it. I didn't charge as much as somebody who's a professional full-time potter would, because I knew it was going to take me a long time, and they were okay with that, right? Like in the end, it took me 2 years to actually complete their dinner set. Because of the problems I ran into, because of some of the production problems and everything else. The other thing is, what I ran into was that my fellow co-op members, plates take up a lot of room in the kiln.
Yeah.
Because in the glaze firing, right, in the bisque firing, they don't. You can stack them, right? Glaze firing, you can't stack them. And so anything that is wide takes up an inordinate amount of room in the kiln, right? So my kiln mates were only willing to let me fire so many plates at a time.
That makes sense. That's a lot of this kind of relates to software in terms of repeatability, in terms of working alongside other people with the same equipment. Can I take this opportunity to kind of ask, both of you have been around tech for a long time.
Yeah.
And I've been around like 6 years maybe. And I have some questions that I thought maybe you could answer. Just a couple. Okay. One is something that keeps coming up on this show is Sun Microsystems. What is Sun Microsystems, and why is it so? Why is everyone touched it?
Yeah. So I used to joke, back when I was in Silicon Valley, right? So as somebody who was a programmer, and I made this in the mid-aughts, right? If you were a professional full-time programmer in the mid-aughts in Silicon Valley, I used to joke that everybody had at some point in their career worked for either Sun Microsystems or Sybase.
Oh, I've never heard of Sybase. Yeah.
It's because they're gone now. Okay. And they actually got buried early in the aughts, for honestly very good reasons. Like Sun, they were good at making software and terrible at running a business. And both of those companies churned through people, right? Like, despite the fact that Sun existed as a company for whatever it was, 25 years, something like that, the average tenure of an engineer at Sun was 2 years. And so over 25 years, if they're effectively rehiring all of their engineers every 2 years, you go through like the entire programmer population of Silicon Valley. So
is it like AWS kind of known for that too? Are we not?
I think so, except I think a lot more people... I mean, once AWS, by the time AWS came in the scene, the national and global programmer population was much larger.
Okay. That makes sense.
Because think about, we're talking about the 90s, right?
I think AWS has a reputation of, since they have like an accelerated vesting schedule over 3 years, pretty much everyone will stay there at least 3 years to get the full payout. And then you sort of figure out, like, I like this culture or I don't. And it's very black and white, as it were. And I think people like sort of figure that out, and they either stay or they go.
Yeah.
I want to hear more about how Sun's terrible at running a business.
So I mean, the thing is, you had a lot of this in the 90s in Silicon Valley, right? Because the world of sort of software and, importantly, internet exploded. And as a result, there were a lot of companies that had a good and very marketable technical idea. And they were able to make so much money with that it didn't matter that the rest of their business skills were non-existent.
Sun Microsystems actually make?
Servers.
Okay.
So if you were hosting a large-scale commercial website, like if you were running eBay, for example, to pick a specific example that I happen to know about, if you were running like the eBay site in 1998, which was already hot and had millions of users, et cetera, right? Those were running on what we called Sun pizza boxes.
Okay.
The Sun Netras, we called them pizza boxes because that was really the shape of the machines. And you'd have like big racks of these. And Sun had their own computer chip, right?
An operating system.
Yeah, and operating system. It was a BSD-based operating system, one of the BSD branches.
That startup I was at, we had a Solaris box. That was the name of their operating system. So you would call it a Solaris box. It's similar to like I mean, NVIDIA is a whole other scale, but it's similar to like, well, everyone's going to buy one of these now. And before you had cheaper, before Dell and HP and the super micros and all these people figured out really cheap servers, and before Linux was just widely accepted, it was just like, well, we have this for the internet. That's it. And so everyone would buy these boxes.
Yeah. And they were good boxes, right? Like the actual technical production was amazing. Like I actually ran my first web business from 2000 to 2003, 2004-ish, because I and a partner realized that even if the crash had happened, people still needed web hosting. And in 2000, after the crash, we were able to get Netras, Sun Netras, for 10 cents on the dollar from their original price. Maybe less even, actually. They were really cheap because all of these first wave internet startups had gone out of business. And in some cases, they had gone out of business so abruptly with so little planning for shutdown that you could literally buy equipment from a former employee out of their garage.
Whoa.
Right? So it was something that was colloquially known at the time as five-finger severance because a lot of these employees had not been paid. So they had not been paid, and so they were basically making up their last paycheck by selling off the company equipment. So
and tell me if my conception of it is wrong, but this part was that Sun had a well, you worked there, unlike me just observing it, so you would know better. But like it was a very engineering driven culture, which is to say there were engineers doing interesting things and trying stuff out, which is great.
Yeah.
You love that. Now what's the word? Derisive? No, the negative, judgy version of engineering-led culture means you make stuff that is not sellable, right? But that wasn't. There was a fair amount of that going on.
Yeah, but that wasn't the main problem. The problem is the leadership of Sun believed very strongly in social Darwinism, which means that their way of cultivating new leadership was to literally pit departments against each other. And we used to joke that you could not get promoted to director unless you had stabbed at least one other employee in the back.
Oh, no.
And this was a disaster for actually running a business. I mean, to give you an example of one of these that I was part of, right? So Sun briefly had a database department. That I was a manager in. That was the reason why I went over, was because I'd been working on Postgres. I was Postgres core team for a while. And one of the things that I decided that Postgres needed more than anything in the world for spreading it all over and getting people to adopt it was to have a tier one vendor that actually supported it, right? And so when Sun approached me and they said, hey, we're putting together a database department. Postgres is going to be one of our products. We'd like you to run it. I took it up. And and I went, and so, we had the database department but obviously as a new department and as Sun previously not having done their own databases and also having a partnership with Oracle, it was difficult to build a business. Right. So then we had this sort of breakthrough. We ran into a customer that wanted to, have this huge migration and that sort of thing. They also wanted to buy a whole ton of storage, and Sun had its own storage at the time. And so it was this $1.5 million deal of software and storage, et cetera. Well, we were part of, as databases, we were part of the Solaris department. So the head of the storage department pulled out of the deal just to screw over the head of the Solaris department.
Oh, no.
And the whole thing collapsed.
And
that sort of thing happened constantly.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's wild. Why? I don't get it, because it only hurts everyone.
Yep. But it hurt the head of the Solaris department more, and I think they actually got replaced after that. So that was what they cared about, right? Is that we ended up
the most likely candidate for whatever promotion if they can knock out the other person.
It is often a mystery how an organization ends up like that. It is. I haven't thought about it in a while, but it seems like you kind of hit on this. Sun was also on this often deadly path. I don't know. Portfolio strategy where you're doing not only the hardware but also the software that you run on top of it. So and there's very few companies, maybe there's almost none, that can pull this off. But for example, you're saying, as I recall, a lot of Solaris was moved by Oracle and vice versa, right?
Yeah.
So you don't want to piss off Oracle. And then here's Postgres trying to start up a business. And so
the reason the reason that they
conflict there.
Yeah, the reason that they fired up our department, that was originally actually good strategy because, I thought it was good strategy. Let me go later on what actually was happening. I thought it was good strategy because the Sun Oracle partnership was in jeopardy. So it was a useful threat from Sun to say, hey, Oracle, you better renew the partnership because otherwise we're going to go into competition with you.
And what was actually happening?
What was actually happening was that they wanted MySQL. So the Postgres MySQL rivalry from the early days was famous, but the truth is, in terms of the people who actually developed the software, we knew each other. Some of us were friends. We had a couple of major contributors who went back and forth between the two databases because, once again, going back to the 90s, early aughts, you could have easily fit everybody doing actual database engineering into one room. And it wouldn't even been that big of a room. So and so it was actually, if you look at it from a very smart long-term strategy, but not something that once I figured it out, I left Sun, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to be a You don't want to be, let's call it a potential winner that ends up being a pawn.
Right.
Right.
And Sun hired me and started the Postgres strategy both as an enticement and a threat to MySQL because Sun was trying to buy MySQL.
Oh.
And they knew both I was very friendly with a lot of the MySQL staff, right? And also that, once again, they could say, hey, MySQL, we're a tier 1 vendor. We can build up Postgres. Because at the time, right, the MySQL user base was easily 10 times the size of the Postgres user base, right?
Yeah.
Maybe 20 times. But tier 1 vendor sponsorship would change that. It really would change that. As it turns out, other things change that on their own. But and Sun was buying MySQL not as a business strategy, but because the executives were already planning to sell the company, so sell Sun. And they knew that owning MySQL would cause both IBM and Oracle to raise their offers.
And do you know how much they paid for MySQL, Whitney?
No.
I believe it was $1 billion. Something like that, which
was
in the 90s. Oh my God!
Right.
Yeah.
But I bring up for comparison. It's like, that sounds like your monthly bill.
Yeah. It was 2008, but it's important to understand that it was the most that had been paid for an open source company at this time.
Absolutely.
Right. Uh-huh. Red Hat's revenue was just barely $1 billion. Right. So it was the most that had been paid for an open source company on record, and pretty high up in terms of the amount that was paid for any kind of a startup, right? I think PayPal was actually a sort of similar amount. And PayPal had a huge revenue. So and that was also part of a standard, sort of stock market resolution thing. Because if you look going into the late aughts, Sun had a problem that you don't want to get into when you're running a company, which is that Sun's total stock value had actually dipped below their cash on hand.
Oh.
And you don't want to be in that position because then you are a target for corporate raiders, because if they can do a leveraged buyout, then they can use your cash on hand to pay off the buyout.
Oh, wow. I've learned so much about business as a tech person.
And then Optimization City after that. It's a thrilling time.
So do you think, you've talked about quite a few ways now Sun was doing business badly. Do you think there are modern day companies can get away with being bad at business now, or at least in small ways? Or do you think that's just, it's too cutthroat now?
Yes. And plenty of them are, right? Because look at it this way. And this is actually a mistake people do when they're looking at businesses to emulate, right? Mm-hmm. There's a tendency that when you look at a business that is being financially successful, to assume that every single thing that business does is financially successful. Whereas it can sometimes be the case that there's literally only one thing that business is doing that's financially successful, but that thing earns so much money that it makes up for everything else they're failing at.
Yeah.
Right. And I'll give you a couple of famous examples that other people have written about, right? One is Google is notoriously bad at creating application platforms, right? Other people have written about this, right? Is that they just can't seem to hit on a formula that developers actually want to adopt for a variety of reasons, right? I'll let the people who actually do application platforms who've written about this check out their words, right? I'm just saying this, that, there was this Google Apps universe thing. They've had other generations of stuff. Google Cloud has had, issues with developer uptake and that sort of thing. But Google's other businesses, advertising, search, a whole bunch of other things are successful enough that division of their business can lose money more or less continuously, right?
Yeah. It's not, I understand. I don't really know firsthand, but I understand it is a good business strategy to have R&D in areas that you're growing in, or that, like, you might fail at first as long as you succeed eventually. So I don't think some failure is necessarily a problem in terms of business strategy, but it's more, you're saying, someone looking out from the outside to the inside at the business, getting the wrong idea about how it's profitable.
Yeah, because like, one of the things you might say is, hey, Google's a big successful company, right? I'm launching a new cloud host company. I'm going to emulate Google Cloud's entire strategy, right?
Okay.
Ignoring the fact that is the least successful thing that Google has been doing historically compared to all of their other businesses, right? And I'd say that's actually true of big businesses in general. With big businesses in general, you would say, if you look at the majority of things they're doing, are either indifferent or not successful. It's just they have a few things that they're really good at and that are making a lot of money, and those make up for the rest. Now, super companies with super good strategy and good centralized management start dropping the things that they're not good at. They start being realistic about it, right? But there is a tendency to keep trying to say, oh no, if we restart this, and to not realize that it might actually be a problem with your company culture, right? It might be a problem with your company culture, that you just cannot focus properly on this particular thing, and you should stop trying to do it.
Like an example of one of the things, at least in my head, that you're talking about there is, you look at, I worked there for a couple of years. You look at Dell, and they're pretty good at exploring new things and then dumping them when they're like, we're good at hardware, right? So they spun up a whole business of services, and then I was there trying to help out with strategy for like a software group when they bought Quest and Cloud and everything. And then, eventually that all kind of like was pushed down, and they just have it's an interesting case of how to try new things without completely tanking the business. And then as you pointed out, like divesting of things once you're kind of done with them, which is not cool for the divested, but it sort of like maintains the long-term viability of the company. I mean, mind you, in contrast, you could look at like the metaverse over at Facebook land, where it's sort of like that was a big leap into completely unrelated stuff, and with lots of commentary about, well, here's how it's totally related to cat pictures or whatever goes on in Facebook at the moment. But really, it was just like way out of the capability zone and extremely expensive.
But it, and that's actually a good example, but the metaverse is a good example of doing something in order to entice investors and not because you think it's going to be successful.
That's a bananas thing that happens in modern business that maybe I don't think was around so much in the Sun Microsystems era, which is just the VC money that's now piped into everything and trying to please investors rather than trying to please a potential user base.
I mean, as an engineer, I find where it's gotten to be really a problem in terms of the quality of what we're producing these days. Because if you go back to the aughts, right, which, and even the 90s and the first year of internet, if you're running a startup, it was a choice, actually. There were a lot of successful startups that did not take VC. Or that effectively only took minority VC, right? They took some investment, but they never gave over control of the company, et cetera. um, and some that never took any at all. And that meant that, founders were looking a lot more, well, hopefully, looking a lot more at, is this investment really going to help grow the business or not, right? Rather than assuming they automatically had to take it. But then back then, the amount of money that you got through VC was an order of magnitude, a couple orders of magnitude smaller.
Yeah.
The problem that we have now is there is so much VC money that you don't have a choice anymore, right? You come up with a product idea, right? Your initial product idea for your company. You launch it. If you get a bunch of press and you're not taking VC, what will happen is someone else will launch a copycat idea,
take VC,
$50 million worth of VC and bury you in marketing. And then they will buy your company so that they'll actually have a good product.
Well, how closely tied do you think, I'm going to speak in general terms here.
Yeah.
Like the sort of happiness and health of the open source community is tied to like the software funding model. And what I mean by software funding model, I'm going to call it a cycle instead of like, maybe, you start a company in a garage, you get a little bit of investing, you have an IPO, and then, you're the next IBM. I mean, that's kind of like a traditional model. And then there's a little bit of variation where like, with a little bit of Sun stuff. And nowadays it's kind of like, or what if we never IPO? Right? Like what if we just stay private forever and ever and ever, and we amass this huge ball of money and we might acquire companies. I mean, there's, I think through all three of our careers, because things have changed a lot in recent years, like the kind of funding cycle for software has changed several times. And so how like closely tied is the open source body, if you will, to that?
Well, I mean, I would say that this happened earlier, but I would say that due to economic pressures that, there was no way to work around, we've lost one major thing out of open source, which is if you turn the clock all the way back to the 90s, the majority of open source software was actually produced by end users.
Oh.
And there were huge advantages to that because, number one, it meant that what was being produced was a lot closer to what people wanted, right? Because they were the users, right? And the second part of it is there wasn't this competition between, hey, I want this to be free and available to everybody, to, hey, I need to make some money off of it. Because you didn't need to make any money off of it. As a matter of fact, your more focus was, can my company save money by using this? Right? Which didn't require you to charge anybody else anything.
Why does one model need to replace the other? Why couldn't they coexist?
Well, so what happened was, right, between 1995 and 2005, right? Let alone, 2010, 2014, whatever. What happened was it became possible to make money off of open source software, right? People figured out, hey, this can be freely available, but we can still make money, right? My current employer, Red Hat, kind of led the way on that. There were other Red Hat contemporaries, but none of them, I don't know any of them that did particularly well at that open source model. But, once Red Hat became $1 billion company, everybody else was like, hey, there's something here. And the thing is, once it was possible, financially possible, to become an open source software vendor, you had this order of magnitude problem, right? Which is no end user engineer is going to be able to spend more than a fraction of their time on writing software.
Let alone like,
whereas if you're an engineer working for a vendor, you're spending full time. If you're working in a startup, you're spending double full time, right? Working on producing software. And so even though the end user is still in the mix, their percentage of who's working on what shrinks down to 5-10%. But the problem that introduces for open source, right, is now that it belongs to vendors, there needs to be a revenue model. And sometimes that revenue model conflicts with open source community needs.
Yeah. And so then also, as you know, open source is often trying to solicit contributors. Like, I kind of get the older model. If I'm a contributor on a project that I love and use, that feels cool. But if I'm a contributor donating my time to a project that's making another company money, that doesn't feel good. So how does that translate into the experience of contributing to open source?
Well, that's why we have open source foundations now, right? Because that is a genuine major problem. And that's why the Linux Foundation exists.
But how does the Linux Foundation help solve the problem?
So instead of, right, so, you know, I can talk about my employer in this regard, right? We have a project, right? Like, say, Podman, right? Which has gotten really popular.
Which is a container runtime.
Right? Yeah. Okay. It's the way to run containers on machines, right? And also build them and also, you know, shuttle them around, working, you know, sort of together with Kubernetes, et cetera, right? And also these days a way to build and run operating systems, but that's a side thing. So you know, but as long as it was a completely Red Hat owned project, contributions from other vendors were going to be limited, right? Yep. So Red Hat donated it to the Cloud Native Computing Foundation so that other vendors like Microsoft, for example, or you know, Apple, would feel that they would not have second thoughts about putting somebody on it if they were using it.
Yes. It still doesn't address why, like, an individual would want to donate their time to open source anymore, but it doesn't. Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's plenty of reasons for individuals to do it. Like, one of the things I don't want to get away from, particularly because, like, these days I'm actually mentoring a lot of Indian contributors. And, you know, and if we're looking at individual programmers, don't forget, and this goes back to, you know, many years in open source, there's a career motivation, right? Which is if you do a lot of open source contributing, that becomes your resume. And like, literally just 2 days ago, I had one of my mentees send me a message that they got their promotion, and part of it was on the strength of their open source contribution record. You know,
that's wonderful.
And I have another one waiting in my inbox where I'm supposed to write a letter of recommendation for somebody at another company based on their open source contributions. So, and if you're leadership in an open source project, you should never overlook the fact that whether or not you personally do, people have those career motivations, and you should cultivate those, right? Because it's a good reason for them to spend time on your project. And so you should look at that to say, hey, how can my individual contributors advance their careers through my project? Because it's a win-win, right? They get promoted and you get contributions.
So you said up top that you work a lot with the Kubernetes project. What's your role within Kubernetes?
Right now it's kind of a grab bag of things. You know, mostly because, like some of the other people I'm sort of second generation with Kubernetes, right? So I'm not part of the founding generation, but I was recruited shortly after that. You know, mostly because I was already involved with Docker. A bunch of the early Kubernetes people were former MySQL people. And so as a result, they specifically reached out to me. You know, and for me, you know, I was actually looking to solve certain other problems. Like, I started out from an end user perspective, right? Which is, I was managing customers with a lot of software and managing those software installations across their fleet of servers was becoming a real problem. And vSphere, which was the largest solution at the time, was too expensive for a lot of my clients. You know, plus they were looking at needing to hire a full-time vSphere admin or actually pay us, because our company had a couple of people who were certified vSphere admins because it was a good service to rent out. It was very lucrative. But they didn't want to pay those fees, and so we were looking for something more affordable for them. So I came in and somehow got recruited very early on to the release team. That was first being formed, right? Because initially all of the Kubernetes releases were done completely by Google staff. And this was a problem, right? Because nobody, including Google, wanted Kubernetes to be an exclusive Google project. But if you have to have Google employee rights to do a software release, then that means that Google could never pull its engineers off of doing releases.
Yes.
And some of the individual engineers who are doing Kubernetes releases wanted to personally move on to other things.
So you were not at Google and got recruited.
I was not at Google employee. I was working for Red Hat at this point already. So Red Hat had their own like early container platform called Atomic that I was hired to work on and promote. And but I was already dabbling with Kubernetes and stuff. As a matter of fact, I joke that I'm probably the only one who actually had a production install of Kubernetes on version 0.4.
Wow.
It was a very peculiar use case for which weirdly that early sort of beta-ish version of Kubernetes worked better than I think later production versions would have worked.
Wow.
I'm in there. I've been contributing to docs and that sort of thing. I didn't actually start to learn Golang at all until I got involved with Kubernetes, because previously I'd been, I contributed to Python. And by the way, going back to the liberal arts degree thing, right? It's one of the reasons why this learning how to learn thing is so important is if you stay in computing, you end up having to shift programming languages multiple times, right?
Oh, yeah.
I started with BASIC. I learned COBOL back in the 90s and Fortran, which was actually useful. I joke I did COBOL as late as 2014. Wow. Because it's still around. Then went on to Pascal and Visual Basic and C and Perl. And then Python and Ruby.
Wow.
And because there's a cycle, and at a certain point, if you want to keep working on new stuff and not just maintaining old stuff, you have to shift programming languages. And Absolutely. So you just need to get used to the idea that, hey, every 5 years I'm going to be learning a new programming language.
The only constant is change.
Yeah. And it's the same thing. People are like, oh, you doing anything with Rust? I said, I've seen stuff that Rust look cool. I just don't have a use case right now. Right. A use case will probably eventually come along, and then I'll learn Rust. Right.
Bringing it back to Kubernetes, you were on the release team at first, and what other things
team, right?
Have you
because
done?
I was looking for a way to contribute, where I was not competent enough with Go to be contributing to actual core Kubernetes, right? But looking at the sort of areas of the project that needed help, we're going like, oh, we're forming this release team and everything else, and I'm like, well, I did a bunch of the PostgreSQL software releases. I did software releases for OpenOffice. So I'm like, I have release experience. I'll raise my hand and I'll volunteer. And this was for version 108, I think. And this is the first time that each of the Google people who's doing releases took sort of an apprentice that we call a shadow. And so I was supposed to be shadowing somebody on marshaling all of the PRs that were going into the current release, right? So figuring out what should be tagged for the release and what shouldn't be tagged for the release and everything else. Except that the Googler who I was supposed to be shadowing then left Google and left Kubernetes.
Oh,
so I ended up actually going immediately to being in charge of marshaling all the PRs because it was one of those things that actually did not require Google employee permissions to do.
Okay.
So kind of straight into it. But in the process, I and the other people leading those sort of early form release teams came up with this entire release team system that is now sort of a development machine for Kubernetes.
Oh, wow.
Where, every release every 4 months has a system of leads and shadows, and some of the shadows get promoted to being leads for the next cycle, etc. And there's a whole defined system for how people are recruited and trained to work on the next release.
That's impressive that all of Kubernetes actually is impressive to me, because isn't there something like 80 or 90,000 contributors to Kubernetes?
Yeah, but I wouldn't say those are not actually all. I mean, that's like over time, right? How many active contributors? And if you do the graph, you'll discover that there's 70,000 people who contributed one PR, right?
That's me.
I would say,
but still, managing 10,000 people.
Yeah, active now. Doing our whole curve from the one patch contributors to the full timers, right? It's still. Let's see, according to our org member records, 700 or 800.
Okay. Yeah.
Which is actually huge as far as open source projects go, right?
Absolutely.
And it's big enough that we need a management system. And at the time that we developed a lot of our systems, we had some advantages, right? That I'm not sure whether or not other open source projects will ever have again. It was certainly the first time in history that I'd ever seen this through open source, which was in the early days of Kubernetes, we just had all of the money that we wanted, right? It was the hot thing. Multiple companies were throwing a lot of money at it. And so we not only had what really amounted to an excess of engineers, right, contributing to it. So back in those days, in terms of the people who were there was probably over 1,000 people who were, at least 1/4 time on Kubernetes, right?
Wow.
So just tons of input. And importantly, this was also the sort of golden days of open source practice offices at vendors. And so we also had an entire cluster of people who were management types, either community management or product management, who were available to spend time doing process development and doing organizational development for the project, right? And that was really important because it meant that there were all of these processes we set up, right?
It's been able to scale,
because we had people who had experience in developing processes and who had time to think about the process for its own sake, rather than I need to fix this bug. They had time to think about what is the bug fixing process, right? How many people should sign off on it? How should the tests run, right? And that meant that we have really good systems for it that continue to pay off, especially now that we have less staffing than we used to have, right? Now that we have that less staffing, we can actually rely on all the systems that were set up when we had more people.
I understand recently you've been, you were co-chair of SIG Developer Experience. So SIG stands for Special Interest Group.
Yeah.
So is that correct? That was a pretty recent
contributor experience. Contributor experience.
Okay. What are your duties as part of that special interest group?
Yep. So SIG contributor experience, speaking of that sort of management layer, right? Oversees a bunch of stuff around what is it to be a contributor to Kubernetes, right? And so this includes things like mentorship programs, like managing the list, managing GitHub rights, managing the list of who is a current contributor, because there's this concept called org member, which is, who's a current contributor and therefore, like on a technical level, is allowed to interact with the CI bots.
Okay.
The and who manages the contributor website that has all the information around how to contribute, who runs contributor onboarding. We have this thing called the new contributor orientation.
That makes sense.
We've had a number of different programs for contributor onboarding, right? Like I started out, Gwyn and I and Paris started out with a live one. Mainly it was Gwyn and me. Started out with a live one at KubeCon back 7 or 8 years ago. And that, worked for 2 or 3 years. And then it requiring it to be in person was too restrictive and we weren't getting the right people. And so they moved to an online version. And I mentioned the NCO because I believe that the next new contributor orientation is next week. For
exciting.
Anybody listening who's interested in contributing to Kubernetes. So look up Kubernetes new contributor orientation. It happens 2 time slots, 12 hours apart, so that people around the world can join.
Well, that's nice.
And so in one way it's a grab bag of things, but another way it's like hey, somebody needs to oversee, right? If you're going to have 800 active contributors, right? Somebody needs to be the HR department for those contributors. And that's contributor experience. That's contributor experience.
Of course.
And we co-founded that SIG, right? Contributor experience was originally Paris Pittman's idea. And so she co-founded that with several people, including me, to run it initially and build all these systems, right?
Cool.
Then I was in the first generation and, as the contributor management, we really believed in leadership cycling, right? So after a couple of years, I recruited my replacement and I signed off from being lead of SIG contributor experience, went to work on other things. I came back because we had a little bit of a crisis where, there was only 3 leads for the SIG and 2 out of the 3 leads for the SIG had career crises where they had to step down abruptly, not having recruited anyone to follow them. And so it's something that happens. One of the nice things about having this huge pool of people who've been contributing for a while, right? This happens all the time is if you actually have a leadership crisis, you have this sort of emeritus pool that you can draw from where you can say, hey, Tim or whoever, can you just step in for long enough to recruit somebody new to replace you?
You have some resiliency built into it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. This seems pretty well staffed for that.
Yeah. And like I said, and I didn't actually think about how important it was to have all these systems until we're getting now into the age of AI assisted contributions.
Yeah.
Right. And we're talking among projects about low quality AI contributions.
AI slop,
right? Because
they say,
yeah, because the advantage to a lot of the AI assistants is that used well, it helps contributors improve the quality of their contributions. Used badly, it allows contributors to produce a higher volume of just terrible contributions. And we were looking at how this was affecting Kubernetes, and the answer was actually not much. Because the truth was, Kubernetes, having been a very popular major target for new people getting involved in open source, going back 10 years, right? We already developed systems for dealing with high volume, low quality contributions, right?
That's amazing.
Right.
And so dealing with the AI assisted ones was not different. Yeah. And so like there've been some specific things, right? Like things around reporting CVEs that have been annoying, but they haven't actually risen to the level of annoying, beyond annoying, right? And then when I talk to people from projects who are really struggling with this, it's because they never had systems to deal with low quality contributions to begin with, right? They didn't have any way to evaluate contributions, that wasn't extremely labor intensive.
They didn't have a quantity problem yet, so
right. They didn't have a quantity problem yet, so they didn't have the concept of triage. They didn't have automated pre-submit tests. You know, they didn't have any of the other things that allows you to screen out a lot of stuff that's just not worth looking at. And the struggle is real, right? Because if you're on a project that only has 4 maintainers, and like only one of those maintainers is actually really full time on the project, trying to develop those systems while continuing to patch stuff and get releases out and everything else, it's really hard.
Well, to that point, why don't you tell people again, like if they want to figure out how to be a contributor and help out with all of that? Where do they go to sign up for this? So look at seminars, but the things you were just mentioning.
Yeah. I mean, for Kubernetes, look for new contributor orientation, right? I don't. That would be kind of the long route to help other people's projects, simply because, yes, if you actually work on Kubernetes for a while and work with our systems and everything else, you'll get a better idea of what you need to build for other projects. But that might be kind of the long way to do it, right? Because there's a lot of systems, and it's going to take you a couple of years to get really sort of a grip on it. And some of the things you just can't copy for a smaller project because, like, it makes sense for Kubernetes to have its own 60-node Kubernetes cluster for running CI software, right? It doesn't make sense for a lot of smaller projects to do that.
Right.
And things like Prow, which is our custom-built CI bot, is not really designed to run on much smaller hardware installations.
And then before we wrap up, like, how about yourself? So if people want to see more of what you've been up to, you have some place on the World Wide Web that people
So you can go to berkus.org, berkus.org, which has some links to. I'm not great about keeping it updated. It mostly has links to old talks that I did. But other places you can find me. I'm one of the organizers for Portland Cloud Native Kubernetes meetup. We have meetups once every 2 months. Also for DevOps meetup, which we alternate with every other month. I'm on the program committee for Southern California Linux Expo, so you can find me there. And at least for the time being, my job involves me being at least 3 KubeCons a year.
All over the place.
Yeah, all over the place. So that's also a good place to find me. And of course, on Kubernetes Slack and Cloud Native Slack, also Chaos Foundation. So I'm not hard to find. I'm not hard to find. And one weird advantage that I got that you could never imagine is the fact that my family name is unique and it's not a big family. So as a result, it makes it easy for people to find me on the internet because they type in Josh Berkus and they get me. They don't choose between 5 different Josh Berkuses.
Well, thanks for being on. I think it was fun to talk about Sun and then like that the kind of like how things got set up with the Kubernetes community. So that was good stuff. Well, that was great, and now people know where to check you out. So, hello, listener. You've been listening to Software Defined Interviews, and Josh just listed out a bunch of those things. But if you want to check them out, you can go to softwaredefinedinterviews.com/121 and find it there. And with that, we'll see everyone next time.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.